When we travel, we have an urge to share our experience with others. Some of us share photos and videos to Instagram, others text back and forth with family and friends, and some people blog about their travels or just share travel stories through discussion. Regardless of where we share our travels, we all have a responsibility to share them mindfully. This is because what we post, write, or say about the places we visit have the power to shape perceptions, maintain unfair stereotypes, and perpetuate colonial views. As my online presence in the travel space has grown, I've become increasingly aware of the language and the images that I use when I share my travels. Someone I came across in my learnings about this is Vinci Ho. She is the founder and executive director of Rise Travel Institute, which is a nonprofit organization that has a mission to inspire responsible, impactful, sustainable, and ethical travel through education. Vinci has a background in linguistics, and with her ongoing work in social justice and travel, Katie and I thought she would be the perfect person to chat with about travel language.
Is this the first time that you've listened to Curious Tourism, the Responsible Travel podcast? If so, make sure that you've hit the follow button right now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app, because there is plenty more to come this season.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Instagram at Curious Tourism Pod. You can DM us or email us anytime. All of our contact info is in the episode description. But before we chat with Vinci, we need to catch up with Katie because she recently got back from a very epic trip.
Oh.
Where did you go?
Such a nice segue. Okay, so I went to Nova Scotia.
Yes.
And had the best time ever. Like immediately, I can just tell you, it was a solid 15 out of 10.
I'm not surprised at all.
It was so fun. So fun. I had the best time ever. And as you know, I took Via Rail all the way from Brantford to Halifax.
That's amazing.
It took me 37 hours.
So it was one sleep.
It was one sleep.
Okay,
yes.
Did you sleep like a total baby?
Yes, I slept so well.
Train sleeps are like, I literally just crave them. They're the best sleeps.
You were messaging me this when I was on the train. You were like, did you sleep so well? Like, rocks me to sleep.
It's true, though. I remember like when we were in India, we were on the night trains all the time and I would look forward to them. Like we're staying in hotels, but I would literally be like, I'm excited for the night train because I would just have the best sleep of my life.
Yeah, Mark and I stayed overnight. We did not sleep in economy or in business class. We were lucky enough to have a sleeper cabin with a shower, which was epic. I don't think I read the tickets properly when I booked them. I didn't realize that I had booked like a bunk bed for Mark and I.
Oh, that's usually all they have.
So basically when we walked in the car, all of the doors are open as people are like entering their rooms. And some people just keep their door open all the time. And you're like, I feel like I'm invading your privacy, but like, okay. Because also there's good
airflow.
Yeah, it is for airflow. Yeah, we had bunk beds and we had breakfast in the dining car and there was like a lounge car. It was a great time. Very chill. Very, very chill. Honestly, a great way to start the vacation because like sometimes you feel like you're just in it immediately when you land and like this new place is just overwhelming. When you're on the train, you can just like simmer into it kind of thing, which was gorgeous.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's so stress-free because all you got to do is just be there.
Just got to show up.
So you got there by train.
Yes.
The trip itself, what were your top 3 highlights?
Okay. So we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast about how I think you and I are similar in that when we travel, we want like a little bit of chill, a little bit of like city life and like kind of an outdoor experience. So that was kind of like what the trip was. So we were in Halifax for like a couple of days. And Kate, did you recommend Yaya Pizza to me?
Definitely.
Because we went there and demolished an entire margarita pizza that was so incredible and delicious and perfectly crispy. I left them a 5-star review. Oh, this is my new thing now. I leave reviews on Google Maps. I am level 5.
Wait, but the important question is, did you go on the Halifax side or on the Dartmouth side?
So we were mostly on the Halifax side, and then we did like a little mini drive through Dartmouth just to like check it out.
Nice.
In Halifax, the places that were like my top Mark and I had so many just fun days there. So we like obviously just roamed around the city just to see what's going on everywhere. And then we went to this really amazing cocktail bar for happy hour. We went immediately after we went and got pizza. We went there to get happy hour oysters. So we got oysters and cocktails, and the vibes at this place, it was called the Highwayman, and it was the most perfect bar ever because the music was perfect. The cocktails were so delicious. Like everything was just cute. And then one night, Mark and I were going to go to what we were recommended to go to, which was this place called the Lower Deck. And they have like the go-to band that plays on Sundays, but it was like orientation week, so all the students were there and there was like a big outdoor festival happening instead. But on our way there, we walked by this place called Pacifico that had a funk band playing, and we were like, that place looks fun. So that's our backup plan. So we ended up going there because the Lower Deck was like jam-packed. And then, so we went to Pacifico, we danced and had cocktails, and it was so fun. Another night, we went to this brewery/arcade and accidentally attended a metal show, and that was super fun. And we were still like bopping and awake that night, so then we decided to go to karaoke and had the weirdest karaoke experience ever because nobody was at this karaoke bar. It was literally just Mark and I in our own private room, and the whole place was silent. And we were like, well, we're in here, like, feel like we need to commit to it. So we had a really good time in Halifax. There's so many fun places to go. It's the city to go if you want to have a nice time. We did go to Lunenburg. We went to Peggy's Cove.
Did you see the Blue Nose?
I'm not sure. We were looking at it from afar.
Yeah, like a big ship with a big ass mast.
They all looked like big ships with big ass masts.
Well, the Blue Nose really stands out, though.
I'm not a ship lover like you. I'm like, cool.
No,
That's a boat.
My like relative was like a person on that ship. There's a record of this.
That's so cool.
I feel like definitely told you this.
Trashing on your experience.
Lunenburg is literally my home. Like my family's from there originally.
We got so much art when we were there to bring home. It was so fun to just walk around and like look at everything. It's
Katie,
just such
this
a
is
cool
why
place.
I wear the Lunenburg shirt.
I've never noticed that.
My father would be so upset if he heard this discussion.
Well, we had a lovely time. We had a really
Did you
nice
know
time.
that it's one of the best preserved like villages in Nova Scotia? Okay,
yes,
good.
I knew this. I knew the historical significance of it being like a UNESCO World Heritage Site and everything. And then guess where we went after we went to Lunenburg?
For lobster.
Yes, we went and got a lobster supper at the Shore Club. And we were so bloated afterward.
Oh, yeah.
This is the travel information everyone needs to know. If you're going to go travel for lobster, be prepared to be so gassy. Because we did a lobster boil at my friend's parents' place. That's where we went, like, kind of our first night. And Mark and I could not stop tooting all night. I have no regrets.
You haven't even said anything about Cape Breton.
Cape Breton was awesome. We stayed in a yurt in Cape Breton at this like hilarious resort that was seemingly completely run by teenagers, but it was just so funny. But yeah, Cape Breton was amazing. We went whale watching there. We saw like a huge pod of pilot whales. We went to Chetty Camp.
Did you drive the whole Cabot Trail?
Yeah, we drove the whole thing.
Nice.
But we only saw half of it because the other half of it was all fog.
Yeah, I always tell people, like, if you're going to Cape Breton, add, like, double the amount of time you think you need, because if you have one bad weather day, it's just, like, it's kind of like Iceland. Like,
yeah,
you just don't know what the weather will be. And if you have, like, one or two bad weather days, you just won't see anything.
Okay, I feel like we have talked quite enough.
Wait, but I think you should summarize like top 3 highlights.
Okay. Number 1, go to Pacifico and watch the Mellotones.
Okay.
Dance party there. best band, definitely in the top 3. I would also say, this is in no particular order, but another top thing was lobster supper at the Shore Club. 1000% worth it. And also the dessert was sublime. Okay.
I'm surprised there's nothing on Cape Breton.
Nothing is on Cape Breton because we spent the least amount of time there. So didn't get to know it as well as the other places. But I would say the other top thing was when we were in Lawrencetown, which I haven't talked about yet. We stayed 4 days in Seaford/Lawrencetown, which is the surfing capital of Nova Scotia. And just staying there was awesome. And I would recommend the bunkie that we stayed in. I would recommend the area that we stayed in. We had the best time literally staying in our bunkie. We did over 16 crossword puzzles in our bunkie. We were just chilling, having a nice time. We rode our bikes all the way to the beach. We got to swim in the North Atlantic. We got to enjoy some classic donair. So just like staying in that area of Nova Scotia, I would just say is a full experience in itself. So those are my top 3.
Love it. Hi, Vinci.
Hello, Erin.
Thanks for joining us. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Thank you for having me on your show. I'm very excited to be chatting with you too.
So to start, I'm really curious about your path to becoming the founder of an organization that's dedicated to responsible tourism. How did you first become interested in responsible tourism? Was there an aha moment or a moment where it just started to become important to you?
I would say there were definitely quite a few of aha moments in the past 10, 15 years or so of, my traveling. I became interested in responsible tourism when I realized how irresponsible I once was as a traveler. So, like elephant riding, I did a few times, and it is absolutely outrageous now that I look back. And I'm surprised and appalled, how as an animal lover, yearning for the connection with animals, I did not notice all the scars on their heads and, caused by the sharp hooks and how they are chained when they're not, quote unquote, in service. So that was definitely one of those moments. I remember back in 2010, I was working in Senegal for a refugee nonprofit, and I took a few days off to travel from Dakar to St. Louis. And on the way there, we drove past the tribal village living in tents. And we got off our 4x4 and basically intruded or invaded the village uninvited. And then the next thing was, we were taking pictures of them and with them. And I believe we even gave them some money, assuming they were poor and probably wanted to make ourselves, feel better. And they never said they wanted our money, And it was so wrong on so many levels. And at the time, I just realized something was wrong, but I couldn't quite articulate what that was. So I had to think about it and reflect. And then afterwards, there was another experience too, which was also an aha moment when I joined a volunteer program in Rwanda led by a Western volunteerism organization. It was very trendy, 10, 15 years ago. I was placed in an orphanage. And again, it sounds terrible right now, looking back, but back then, I believed that was something everybody should be doing, like quote unquote, giving back while traveling. And not until the few weeks I was there did I realize that not only did I have nothing special to offer, the volunteerism company was making a huge profit of white saviorism. And the whole experience was extremely voyeuristic. And I was there taking pictures with the kids. I still have those pictures, teaching them English. And then after a few weeks, they bonded with me, and then I had to go. And then new volunteers came in and the cycle repeated. All the mistakes that I made were either unintentional or even with good intentions, but it's not an excuse, right? I realized that ignorance is not an excuse, and we can all do better and foster more meaningful experiences during our travels in a much more ethical way. So then when I moved to America, I started to work with Good Travel, And I started to learn more about how to use travel or tourism as a force for good, like the real good, instead of just saying that, we are traveling to help the world. And so, like with her and Good Travel and the team of amazing women, I learned along the way that responsible travel or responsible tourism is not just about like wanting to give back while you travel. There's so many nuances to what that even means. And then I also worked with Impact Travel Alliance with Kelly Louise, and I definitely learned a lot from the process as well. So in the past 10 years, little by little, I kind of like made my way into sustainable travel, the sustainable travel realm, and I wanted to write a curriculum to kind of inspire travelers to talk about these things and also reflect upon their own travels like I did, which is how I started Rise Travel Institute 2-3 years ago.
Amazing. Your experience is so relatable because I also, in the past, have done
Mhm.
things that, like, I now recognize were not responsible in my own travels. I actually think it's like a path that a lot of people take because a lot of people I talk in the responsible tourism space say this, that they like had experiences that just didn't feel right to them. And that's when they started to sort of question the way that they were traveling and the impact that that was having. I love that you brought up voluntourism because I actually like recently had a video go viral on TikTok about voluntourism, and I was so surprised at all the comments of people below the video saying that they had participated in voluntourism, but during their experience doing it, they were like, something feels wrong about this. And so it's sort of like it's marketed to you as this experience, but then when you're on it, I think a lot of people nowadays, when they're actually having that experience, start to recognize, like, oh, I don't know about this. So I noticed a lot of the people that were speaking up in the comments of that video were people who had actually participated in voluntourism, which I find really interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that that's very relatable to the topic that we talk about today. It's not in our intention to cause harm, but sometimes we're just not realizing what we're doing that could have an impact on other people.
hmm I love that we're going to talk about language today because this is something I think about so much, like the communications aspect of tourism, because I think like some of the ignorance that people have in their travel practices is because of all this communications that's going on
Yep.
through marketing and through other venues
Mhm.
that sort of make you feel like this experience is good and worth doing. But I wanted to start by talking about how travel today has been shaped by a long colonial history. From my own reading, I found that before leisure travel really took off in the 20th century, most world travel was simply colonialism.
Mhm.
And I think today, travel writing, even the way that we talk about and share our travels, has been shaped by that colonial history. So, for example, the earliest travel writings came from the field notes of colonizers as far back as the 13th century who wrote about their travels. So, with your educational background and your experience in linguistics, as well as your work in social justice, Katie and I thought you would be the perfect person to talk with about travel language. Could you explain why we should be cognizant of how we talk and share the places that we travel to?
Especially nowadays, we're in 2023 with the evolution of social media. Everyone who travels is, in a way or another, a travel writer. And as of today, like more than 1 billion people worldwide are using Instagram, and even more so are using TikTok. Like, Erin, you yourself are a TikTok user. And then there are countless Facebook groups, and then there are self-identified travel writers who have blogs and vlogs and podcasts, and so millions of people, trained or untrained writers, socially conscious or not, are sharing the content, sharing their own travel stories from their own perspectives every single day. And not everyone realizes that they have an immense power to influence their readers or followers, especially those who had never been to those places that they talked about. And that's their first impression about these places and the people who live in these places. Right. So we have this power to influence what people think And we need to make sure that we're doing the place and the people justice, that we write about. So I still remember when, I think it was before I started Rise, I was a member of a few Facebook groups for avid travelers or people who love to travel. And some groups have more than like tens of thousands of members. And it's not uncommon to see someone say, "Oh, I absolutely hate country X, country Y, country
Oh,
Z."
yeah, I've seen this.
I know. I found that incredibly unfair to write an entire country of, to badmouth an entire country and entire people and discourage people from going just because of an unpleasant personal experience while traveling. And I'm sure everyone has had like very unpleasant experiences back home throughout our lives anyway. So does that
Yeah.
mean that people should never come visit? No. And it's also so unfair to judge when you don't even know the historical, political, or social context of the country you're traveling to and the conditions people live in and the challenges and injustices that they're fighting every single day. So when we get there as a short-term tourist, observing things through our own lens, shaped by our own worldview, and an unconscious bias without understanding why things are how they are, then feel the entitlement to generalize about the country or people. That's really irresponsible and unjust. So if we're not cognizant of the language we use when we talk about a place or a people, we risk misrepresenting them, and we risk perpetuating stereotypes, biases, and causing harm. We have a huge responsibility in terms of like what we share on the internet and what we share through our writing or like our photos as well.
Absolutely. I think it's so easy to forget like how powerful language really is,
Absolutely.
especially when people see these repeated messages, these generalizations and these biases that get like repeated through all these little messages. It may seem like nothing, but when you combine them all, it can really shape someone's perception of a place.
And hence change people's lives for the worse.
Absolutely. And the frustrating thing is like these generalizations, like they're rooted in misunderstanding of a place. So we've talked about why it's important to be mindful of how we talk about our travels. Now let's focus more on how we choose specific words. So some words that we use in travel can convey colonial undertones. I was hoping you could give us some examples of those words and explain why using them can be harmful.
So I think before we take a closer look at some examples of words and expressions that convey colonial undertones or even outright oppressive, I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page with our listeners on a couple of things. First of all, English is obviously not my native language, and I've spent 40 something years learning it, and I'm still learning every day. But I wanted to say that even for native speakers, there are words that we didn't consider as offensive maybe 5 years ago, and now all of a sudden we're told that they're offensive. And our job is to understand why they are offensive or oppressive and the harm that they could cause, and then just learn not to use them anymore. I recognize that this is a hard process of unlearning. And from my perspective as a linguist, it is certainly incredibly difficult. Because for decades we've acquired the language systems the systems of the languages that we know and how they intersect with social constructs that we've also internalized. But that does not give us the excuse to continue to perpetuate harm, because all it takes for us is to be more mindful with the words that we use. So just 2 decades ago, it was totally okay to use the term third world, for example. And now it's unacceptable. And the term developing countries is generally accepted because that's what the UN uses. And the global north and global south, the north-south divide is not entirely accurate, but that's what we use to distinguish between historical colonial powers or like the present economic powers as opposed to the rest of the world. Is it the most ideal way of referring to countries? Maybe not, but this is the kind of language that we're working with right now, and language keeps evolving. So maybe like a few years down the road, we'll come up with better terms, more ethical terms that will be able to represent the countries in a more just way. I'm going to share a few examples of words or expressions that either have colonial roots or implications that are exclusionary. I personally have retired using most of them, but it doesn't mean that you should never use any of them because sometimes it also depends on the context. And in some contexts, it may be okay or more neutral to use certain words. So the first couple of words that I think that come to mind would be discover or the explore. Like clearly, like the word discovery has its colonial roots. Columbus like discovered the Americas, but hey, like indigenous peoples have been the inhabitants of the Americas before the arrival of European settlers and African slaves in the 15th century. So like people were already living here where we're talking right now, where we're living right now. So to use the word discover, it's almost like, hey, like dismissing the fact that people live there already. So the word discover has this colonial undertone and which is why I usually would avoid using it. And then there are obviously like the word conquer. Hey, I've conquered the summit of Mount Everest, and then I like physically erect a flag, of my country up there. Like, what is that about? Seriously. And then the word bucket list.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have a world atlas in front of you and you're putting push pins. Now, I mean, we all do that. Like, I did that before as well, but now I feel that maybe we should stop doing that because countries are not objects. We don't put them
Mhm.
on a bucket list just because there are places that we want to go to and that we want to do a country. Like when people say doing a country, like that also like really
Yeah.
irritates me. It's of course like we all have our preferences of where we want to go, and I acknowledge that. And some places or countries or regions do fascinate us more than others, and we do have some, I don't know, like likings for some cultures over others that we may not even know, right? So, I mean, I understand that, but like making a list of of countries or places and like calling that your bucket list and like, hey, this is the next place that I want to. It's almost like, okay, where to invade next, right?
Mhm. Yeah, I actually like on bucket list because I find that such an interesting one because it's used so often.
I know.
Um, I feel like it almost gamifies travel. Like you were
Hmm.
saying, it turns it into this like activity of collection, which does, when you think about it, have a bit of a colonial feel to it as well. And it makes me think a lot about country counting as well,
Country
because
counting,
I know a
passport
lot of
stamps. Yeah.
people, like I see it in people's bios all the time, like 60 plus countries. And it always makes me think about, to go back to your point about doing a country, I always think to myself, like, no one can really do a country. Like
Hmm.
I could go to India 80 times and still not really have seen India. Even my own country, like I've lived here my whole life, and I don't think I'll ever fully know Canada in the way that I probably should because it's just impossible to really get to know a place in its entirety and in the kind of depth and nuance that like would really mean you've done it. I mean, it's kind of interesting to think about like what does that really mean to do a country?
Also the way of saying it, right? It almost
Mhm.
like feels like objectifying. You're absolutely right. When we travel, even if we do make it to the places on our bucket list, when we talk about travel, like leisure travels, it's usually referred to short-term travel or visits, right? And how even the most superficial understanding of a country you won't be able to get like even just 5% or 1% of that like within a few days, right? And then people feel that they have the authority to write about these places
Yeah.
and to be an authoritative voice, like, oh, I've traveled there, so now I have the right to say something about it. I mean, there are certainly like very good and very ethical travel writers out there. However, like again, back to the social media culture that I talked about, everybody would be sharing something about the places they visit, they recently visited, and then it's just that entitlement, about how right it feels for us to just talk about other people's homes and comment and give our opinions on those places. It's just, yeah, I mean, we have a lot of work to do, and we all need to, I mean, it's a long road of learning again and improvement that we all need to be aware of and on board. Yeah.
Yeah, like I'm curious what you would say because I'm sure you have this struggle as well. Like I'll get invited to do interviews and people will ask me, how many countries have you been to? And it feels sometimes like I'm forced to
Right.
give in to these terms that like I know I don't want to because I'll never even give people a straight answer. I'll just be like, oh, something like this many. I'll always try to avoid it, but I never know if it's like appropriate to counter it and say, actually, I don't want to talk about that. I don't know.
Mhm.
What's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I have a confession to make. Like, I used to do that too. I used to have that in my bio.
Yeah, yeah.
Because the thing is, let's say when you first start your career in tourism, you kind of want to,
It signals authority in a
it
sense.
signals authority, and you want people to like that gives you credibility as well because you are really well traveled. Otherwise, like, why would people listen to you, right? However, it's not about the number of countries that you've been to, it's about how much reflection we have like on our past travels. It could be just a one-time journey, like it could be like a 1 month long journey in one country, but you may get a lot more out of your trip because you reflect upon it and you try to learn and you do research, and you try to connect with the people or try to understand even after your trip, continue to read about the country and like learn more about the culture, as opposed to a person who's traveled to 60, 70, 80 countries, but it doesn't mean anything. It's like a lot of people love quoting Mark Twain's "Travel is what travel is fatal to bigotry, to prejudice." No, travel itself is not fatal to bigotry. It's the reflection upon your own travels and your willingness to learn and research that will help you grow from prejudice and so on. One of the things that I wanted to point out maybe later in this discussion is some of the words are problematic in themselves, but then they're so widely used that you're kind of forced to use them too. Within this industry, you have to. So the word destination, for example.
Yeah,
um,
I struggle with that one so much.
yeah. So the word destination, because as soon as you use the word destination, you're viewing a country as a product of
Hmm.
tourism.
Yeah.
When we talk about our destinations, immediately we're looking at countries or places from the perspective of a tourist. Our destinations are other people's homes, and that's that we all many of us know nowadays and are aware of that. And still, like, we cannot really retire this word because the entire country sorry, the entire industry, the entire world has been using this term. So when you don't use this term, people don't even know what you're talking about, almost, right? So it is very tricky. Even Rise Travel Institute as an organization, we started a conscious travel series, like a series of short courses that are specific to locations. And it's like 1 hour courses on Guatemala, on New Zealand, on Bhutan. We wanted to offer an alternative to travel guides, like the traditional or mainstream travel guides, and we want to take our students on a deep dive into the history, culture, political, social context of those countries nowadays, and how the context is affecting the most vulnerable communities in those places. And we started off by calling them destination courses. And it's still hard to move away from that because that's the language that the entire industry uses. So we have to go along as well. However, internally and with our students, when we get a chance to talk more deeply about these things, we want to be able to have conversations about the nuances. Like when we talk about our conscious travel series nowadays, we would call them place-based courses.
Yeah. After our emailing back and forth, and you had mentioned the word destination in our email thread, and I started to think about it like a lot. And in my own writing, I was like, how do I avoid using this word? And I'm finding like the best way to avoid it is to just say it like with different phrasing, like say the name of the place versus
Say the name of
saying
the place, or
using the word
just use the word
destination.
place. Yeah,
Yeah. Like it's
absolutely.
sort of just like you can omit it by just using other neutral language, is what I'm finding. I wanted to touch on something else you mentioned, which is that a lot of these words like have to do with how tourists are viewing a place like through their own lens. And this is something I find with my own travel writing. Sometimes I'll make a point to say everything I'm telling you is through my perspective as a
Hmm.
visitor in this place. I don't know everything about this place. This is just what my experience was. Um, because that's, I don't know, I personally feel like that's the best you can do because we are tourists, so we have to acknowledge that we are. But I guess what you're saying is it's about just being more responsible about the actual words that we use in representing our own tourist experiences.
Absolutely. So there are words that we need to be mindful of when we write, and also telling your readers that these are observations through my own lens, when I travel, and it should by no means generalize whatever phenomenon that you were trying to depict in your writing. There's also another way of doing it, which is in your travel writing or like during your travels that you're going to write about, connect with the locals and try to bring their voices into your writing as well. You can include quotes, you can have like, short, not as official as interviews, but like you can, if there's a way to record part of your conversations with permission to share their point of views, like their perspectives on things that you observe, then that would make your travel writing a lot less subjective, because sometimes like we make assumptions about how things are in the country that we travel to. And even like with all the news, like all the news that are going on that we read about, I'll give you a perfect example of the Mayan train in the Yucatan in Mexico. It is a hugely controversial project. And from the point of view of a social justice advocate, like, of course, I would think, yeah, no, there's going to be like a lot of negative impact on the local communities having such a big, like, development, like, infrastructure development project, and they're going to destroy a lot of cultural artifacts and things like that. And we're gonna bring over tourism to all these places, right? However, when I got to talk to one of our partners that who work closely with indigenous communities, local communities in the area, they actually say that they really welcome the project because they can see the economic benefits, they can see for the region to kind of open up to the world. And sometimes we have a lot of assumptions about what is good for the locals and what is right for the locals, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's how they think. Of course, there's also education also comes into play, right? Like how much are they actually informed about how they're going to be negative impacted? But still, their voice is important. Their voices are important.
Bringing in other perspectives for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I say
Oh, go ahead.
I saw a ton of examples of like what words we could consider retiring, but like I also want to be mindful of our time because that's a lot. We when we talk about like empower the locals, like what is exotic, what is
Yeah.
authentic,
Oh, yeah.
like those are like, and also there are so many other problematic expressions as well. For example, in all these tourism marketing materials, you see like nature or countryside
Untouched.
untouched,
Yeah.
paradise and like pristine beaches and like as harmless as they seem, we are basically again like dismissing the fact that people do live there. And hey, if you have a pristine beach, that's most likely because it is a privatized beach, which means that like local people are barred from being able to enjoy the natural resources that they are entitled to.
Yeah.
Using the word paradise, it's like, no, well, do you know that there are actually people who live there and who actually are like fighting social injustices every day, and because of our presence as tourists, that there could be injustices that got exacerbated because of tourism projects in those countries, right? So we need to be cognizant of those things before we even choose to use these words.
Yeah, something I do myself is I always think about like, for lack of a better phrase, I'll say to myself, does this word sound like too much? Am I being too descriptive? And a lot of the words that are really problematic in travel, I find, are those sort of over the top phrases like paradise or untouched beaches.
Yeah, that's the sales and marketing language,
It
right?
is. You're trying to sell. And I work in marketing, so I'm like, I know what these words are. I'm just going to keep it neutral.
Because if it's too neutral and then all your competitors are using the over the top words, then you're,
But I also wonder sometimes because like I find when I read especially travel content that uses those kinds of words, the problematic aspect aside, sometimes it feels like they're trying too hard. I find I don't believe what I'm reading because
Mhm.
it just doesn't feel like natural language.
And it doesn't feel genuine. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. I don't find I respond very well to travel writing that is that over the top.
that's right. Yeah, but then, however, most consumers, that's the kind of language that most consumers buy.
Yeah, and are used to. Yeah. So it's pretty clear that the language we use when we write about or talk about our travels has an impact. I know that personally it's been a learning curve over several years to sort of unlearn these common words and phrases, and it's a journey that I am still on. I'm still learning words that I should be avoiding. And I think over time we'll probably find more words that we should be removing because language is always evolving. So it's not easy work. I wanted to ask, are there words that you're finding you're struggling to retire yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, as I just said, destination. It took me some time to stop using the word explore, discover, because we're so used to using those words, right? And then all of a sudden I was told not to use the word explore, and then I stopped using it at all, like, completely, while not understanding that, well, it's actually okay to use the word explore when you say like, explore partnership opportunities, explore like, what this research topic may mean, or, you can still use that word, but not in the sense of exploring a place or like discovering a place, things like that. The word empower is difficult to move away from because it is the language, basically. It is the language that most nonprofits use. And when we say empower women, women empowerment, children empowerment, refugee empowerment, the way I understand is when you use the word empower, for example, it almost implies a power hierarchy. It's like, oh, you are in this position that you want to share, that you want to give power to some people, but then, hey, we took away their power in the first place. It's time to return that power. It's very like it's this the white savior complex that comes in through this word as well. That I'm trying to find a better term for that, but it's hard because there's no equivalent out there. It seems maybe in a few years we'll come up with a better term, but right now for definitely the word empower is tricky.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
find that too. And I also find I struggle, like you said, with explore. Yeah, it's just so commonly used. And sometimes it's like I can't find any synonyms to use in its place. Or if I can, it's like I'm using, because sometimes I'll say like travel or yeah, there's just not that many like other words that you can use. And so it's hard because it's like I don't want to
Exactly.
sound repetitive by using the same word over and over again. And so sometimes it's so tempting to say explore because it's a way to like change up what you're
Yeah,
saying. Yeah. Oh, we can talk all day about this because
I
Katie and
know.
I talk all the time about even the word responsible tourism. Sometimes we're like, is that even the right word?
Exactly, which is why I'm not sure if you know about this, but RISE is actually an acronym for responsible, impactful, sustainable, and ethical. Because like, when we started, we also didn't know like which words would best describe the kind of work that we do. And there's no such word that is like all encompassing. Right now, everybody believes that regenerative travel, like the word regenerative is the term. However, again, there's a lot of regenerative travel washing out there as
Yeah.
well, which is doing the movement a disservice.
I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need to use these words. Like in a perfect world, and this is me just being so hopeful for the future, but in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to decipher between different types of travel and like all travel would have more of a positive impact. So maybe that's the goal that we get to a place where we don't have to use any of these descriptors and we can just say travel. It's hard because I think like a lot of people don't or feel uncomfortable acknowledging how unjust systems of power are reflected in tourism. It's sort of one of those realities that people don't want to face, especially when tourism for them is just their 1 week escape from their
Hmm.
hectic lives and their work
Hmm.
lives. It's so complicated. Like we find it all the time. Whenever Katie and I bring up travel privilege, people are just so upset because they don't want to associate their travels with or their vacation with this just like dose of reality.
It's hard to even understand why this is such a hard concept to grasp because we are those who have who have the means to travel to someone else's homes, and like a lot of locals may never have had the chance to travel outside of their own country, and all of a sudden we feel so entitled and we disembark, like we land there, and then we just look for things that would please us, that would give us pleasure. And that's a concept that need to be deconstructed because we need to start understanding that when we go to a place, it's not our destination, it's someone else's home, and they are the host and we are the visitors, and we are uninvited visitors sometimes, right? So we really need to understand what our place is in this world as we move around, as we navigate, and just try to use or leverage our power and privilege to do better things, more ethical things, in the more ethical way, I guess. I think this is a very, very. I'm loving this conversation, and this is such an important topic. And we at Rise are currently working on putting together an ebook on decolonizing travel. We don't want to come across as the authority, but we are learning as well, and we just want to compile resources for anyone who want to learn and for anyone whom this would resonate with, and provide them with some resources so that they know where to look and where to dive deeper. So yeah, we're very excited about that project, and a lot of what we talked about today actually is included in the ebook as well.
To wrap up, When it comes to sharing our travels through blogs, through social media, or even just through chatting with friends or with family, there is more to it than just language. We also communicate about our travels through images and video and other mediums as well. So I'm curious if you have tips for how people can share their travels in a more responsible way, regardless of the medium. So whether it be language, images, video, what can we do to do better?
Yeah, I definitely would love to share a little bit about what I would do. I certainly would not call them tips because again, like I don't want to come across as like being authoritative in this at all. So I guess first of all, like cultivating awareness and having a willingness to unlearn and understand that it's a journey and that it's okay to admit our past mistakes, like what I just did at the beginning of this podcast interview. It's only through our mistakes that we can learn how to do better, right? So whether you're a travel writer or an organization or a business, and even Rise, there are words that we used to use and that we no longer use because we've learned why they are offensive. And then when we choose our language, always ask ourselves if, whether it carries colonial undertones, is the word, or just basically what I'm writing in general, doing the place or the people justice. Who could be harmed by the way I write and the words I use? Whose voices are left out as well, and who is left out of what the words represent. So by constantly asking ourselves questions and checking out our writing, I think that would be helpful. Seek to decolonize our mindsets in general, because Erin, you just said that sometimes it's not just about tourism. It's about everything, our lifestyle, the way we think, and it's the way we think that we carry with us when we travel, right? So it's not just about travel itself, but like really our mindset and our understanding of the world, and that's something that we can all do better. And then practically, rather than saying discover, I usually simply say visit. Rather than saying authentic, we could say traditional, rather than doing something to help or to empower the locals. What if we just like, completely paraphrase that and say, just emphasize on the respect and the opportunity to learn from the locals and see how we can contribute to projects that they lead. It's about leveling the playing field. It's about like returning the power to the locals. It's about like trying to remove ourselves from the center. And then, rather than saying Burma, say Myanmar. I made this mistake like 12 or 15 years ago myself, not understanding why it was such a big deal. But it is a big deal when we think about all the systemic oppressions that happened during the colonial era and the aftermath and the legacy. It's also about respecting people's identity. Yeah, so there are a number of ways that we can all do better as we document our travels through writing, through our images, and ethical travel photography would be a completely, would be a separate conversation. But yeah, when we just need to realize how much power we have when we write.
Well, thank you. That is great advice. I really love how you phrased that. Okay, so Vincy, we wanted to end on a lighter note and get some of your personal advice about where you live. So I know you're based in the New York area. So we'd love to hear some tips that you have about personal favorites, things to do, where to eat, galleries, parks.
Oh. Wow. Okay. So I live in New Jersey, United States. I've been here for about 10 years now on the indigenous land of Mansila Nape. And I am originally from Hong Kong. So I wouldn't say, I definitely am not a local, and I wouldn't say that I know a lot about where I live. Especially when I go out, I tend to go to Manhattan's, hang out with my friends in Manhattan. So,
well, you can give Manhattan advice. I don't think anyone would be upset about that.
Yeah, so like apart from the biggest museums, I really love tenement museum,
Me too.
yes,
I
like,
tell everyone to go to the tenement. It's so great.
it's so great. Like you can really learn about the first immigrant stories, and it's just fascinating. And then in terms of where to eat, I happen to live very close to the Koreatown of New Jersey, which is Palisades Park, and there's so much great food. And on one street called the Broad Street, you feel like that you're in Seoul, like with all the like signs in Korean and so on. And there are so many like great, delicious restaurants. See that I avoided using the word authentic. But yeah, like if you chance to come over to the side of the river, definitely just like, really feel the presence of this big immigrant population here is just it's very vibrant. So yeah, I mean, I can talk for the entire day.
Well, these
But
are great tips. My partner and I live right on the edge of Koreatown in Toronto, and my partner Lucas is a huge fan of Korean food.
me
And so
too.
he has not been to New York City, and this is something that it's my goal to get Lucas to New York City because I've been a couple times and I just know he will love it. So my goal is to get there and we will go out for Korean food.
Please definitely let me know. I would
I
love to
will.
meet up.
Yes, I would love
Yes,
to.
let's do that.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with a fellow traveler. Make sure you're following us on all your favorite podcast apps. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can leave us a 5-star review or support us on Patreon. Anything you can do to support this show will help to foster meaningful change throughout the travel industry. Curious Tourism, the Responsible Travel podcast, is written and hosted by me, Erin Hines, and it's produced and edited by Katie Lohr in Canada's Toronto area. Our theme music is called Night Stars by Wolf Saga, David R. Miracle, and the Chippewa Travelers. If you want to reach out to us, check the show notes for all the info you need. I'll see you in 2 weeks, but in the meantime, stay curious.